Great. Okay, well, welcome everyone to Envision's College Success Program webinar. This webinar is Your Future is Bright, Tips for Creating a Roadmap to Success After College. So welcome. My name is Katie Otaggio. I am the Engagement Operations Manager for the College Success Program. I am currently wearing glasses. I have long, dark brown hair, about shoulder length, a little past shoulder length, and I am wearing a patterned shirt. So again, welcome to the webinar. Hopefully you are going to get a lot of great information out of this, lots of useful stuff. We have some great speakers today. Before we get started, I am going to I'm going to share some housekeeping items. Questions will be later, during the later part of our time together. You can utilize the chat box or use the raise hand function. If you're on a PC, it's Alt-Y, and on a Mac, it's Option-Y. If you're joining from the mobile app, it's under the More button. So we'll call on names of those with their hands raised, and you'll be able to unmute yourself when it's time for those questions. So feel free to put questions in the chat throughout the webinar, but again, we won't get to those until the end. Just welcoming a few more people that are joining. Welcome to our webinar. So today with us, we have CSP Mentor Preston Radtke. He's going to be moderating the webinar for us. And with us today are two CSP members who have gone through the college process and have either gone on to pursue graduate degrees or to get jobs. So first with us, we have Kennedy Stomberg. Kennedy has been a CSP member since 2017. She attended Co-College for her undergrad in neuroscience, biology, and psychology. And she also received a master's in cognitive neuroscience from the Graduate Center, City University of New York, and is currently also there pursuing her PhD in speech, language, and hearing sciences. We also have Timothy Jones, who has been a member since 2015. He attended Mercer University for his undergraduate degree in music with a concentration on organ performance. And he also received his master's in music with a concentration in piano teaching from Georgia State University. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to Preston, and he's going to get us started. Preston?
All right. Well, thank you so much, panelists, audience members, and organizers for coming out tonight. Hopefully you'll get a lot from this presentation. So I'm going to start with just a few questions for both Kennedy and Timothy, and then we'll break off into individual questions for them. So for the panel, when did you start thinking about what you would do after college? And what were those first few steps that you took to reach those goals? Kennedy, you can start us off.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I first started thinking about what I wanted to do after college between my junior and senior year of college. So about April or May of my junior year, I started thinking about that. And was pretty certain that I wanted to go to graduate school right after college. And sort of the first steps I took was reaching out to faculty members, people that had been my professors that were in my field, and kind of asking them what the application process for graduate school would look like, what things I should consider in terms of deciding if I wanted to go to graduate school or go to work. So yes, I would say between my junior and senior year, and the first thing I did was reach out to faculty members.
So to kind of echo what Kennedy said, I too began to start thinking about future plans a lot during my junior year. Not that I had been thinking about them all along, but junior year was when I began to realize that I would need to go to graduate school if I wanted to have a chance of making a living as a musician. The term starving artists is a real thing out there. It's not just a term that someone coined. And basically what that means is you've got to be a versatile, versatile person in order to make a living as a musician. And so all my life I knew I wanted to do something in the realm of music, but I wasn't sure exactly what that would be. At first I thought about a church organist, and then I began to realize that a lot of churches that put an emphasis on the organ also require their musicians to sight read. And so I thought, well, that's not going to work. And churches who don't require those kind of standards but still focus on the organ generally cannot afford to pay their musicians. So I thought, well, that could be a good gig for Sundays, but you got to make a living too. And so junior year, I began to contemplate, well, what could I do as a musician that would bring in some revenue? And after seeking the advice of several people, I decided to go for piano teaching. And then the question was, where would I do it? And so during my senior year of college, that was when it was the process of auditioning and looking at different schools, pros and cons. And Georgia State actually came out of the blue. I was looking to go to Bob Jones University for my master's degree, but they were out of state. And unfortunately, a month before my audition, they actually called and said that the school voted to shut the graduate music program entirely down starting fall of 2019, which is when I would have entered. And so one door closed and another opened.
So sounds like planning early and kind of leveraging your network and resources is a common theme that I saw in both your answers. Thank you for sharing. Kennedy, I want to go to you now. Tell us how you went about deciding what you wanted to study in grad school, like what field you wanted to get prepared for.
Yes, so sort of a bit of a circuitous route, a bit of a longer answer to this question. So oftentimes in my particular field of neuroscience, what will happen is people will major in neuroscience in undergrad and then go for their PhD in neuroscience. And this was also my plan. I applied to PhD programs and promptly got rejected to all of them. Luckily for me, I had some really great support, some encouraging faculty members. I'll talk about that a little later. And one of them kind of said, you know, maybe you should try for a master's degree because you will probably get into a master's degree with, you know, your grades and stuff. So I applied and got accepted into a master's degree in cognitive neuroscience, which was exciting because that was sort of the area that I was most interested in within my field. And while pursuing my master's degree, I took some classes in speech language hearing sciences, which is what I am currently pursuing my PhD in. I took some classes in that department, and one of the professors was very much encouraging me to apply to that PhD program. And I started to think maybe she might be right because I was becoming very interested in the brain and language and saw a way of pursuing that interest without all of the sort of competition involved in neuroscience, which happens to be a very competitive field. And so kind of based on the encouragement of this professor and based on my own interests, I decided to kind of switch fields and go into speech language hearing sciences, which is where I am now.
Awesome. Well, I really like that answer, Kennedy, because it highlights the vitally important role that relationships with professors can be, because many times when professors give recommendations like this, that's because, you know, they believe in you, they believe in your talents, they think that you're, you know, a valuable member of their potential field. So it's really great to maintain those relationships with your professor, even when you are no longer taking a class with them. So next, I want to move on to Timothy. Timothy, would you be able to walk us through some of the initial steps you took towards acquiring employment after college?
Sure. So all I can say in that is where I am today versus what I was studying in college is nothing more or less than a miracle of God, because as many of you know, piano teaching, especially for young children, is a hands-on activity. And COVID-19 slammed the brakes on my plans big time. My original intent when I had decided to go for piano teaching was that I would one day be able to start a business in my parents' home and eventually earn enough revenue to eventually move into a house of my own and continue it. And I already had a name thought up and studio policy drafts going into effect and everything. And I even got a few students during that time while I was in graduate school that came to me for Braille music training. And I even had one or two piano students for my practicum. But because of COVID, one by one, my students dropped off of the bandwagon, and 2021 came in, and at that time, I'll be honest, I was discouraged due to the pandemic and other issues that we were facing. And I was thinking, I'm going to graduate from Georgia State and end up working at Walmart or some place like that until this pandemic subsides, because everybody's too scared to bring their kids over for lessons. And um, then something told me to go and check the Menvy site. And I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but it stands for Music Education Network for the Visually Impaired. It is an email listserv forum that anyone can join for free who is interested in all things Braille music, or for sighted teachers who want to teach blind students and need advice on how to do so. And so I'd been a member of that list for more than a decade, and a lot of times I would check the list, and it would usually just be people posting of where can I get X score, or how can I teach my student Y. And this particular time, someone had actually posted an internship opportunity with the Library of Congress to work in the National Library Service music section remotely from home, proofreading Braille scores that had been scanned and digitized. And I thought, well, that sounds simple enough. And I applied and was interviewed and graduated in May from school and started the internship in June. And it was only a 10-week internship, but at the time I thought, well, this will carry me through the worst of COVID, and then maybe things will start opening up in the fall and I can teach students. And it just so happened they actually had me proofreading the Bastion piano series titles. So I learned a lot about piano teaching while doing that internship too. So it was a win-win. But during that internship, a colleague and dear friend of mine, I couldn't have gotten through college without him, Gilbert Bush, passed away from not COVID, but in terminal cancer. He had been battling it for several years, and he retired from the library the previous summer. And he died in July of last year, and right when I was in about the height of my internship. And so my internship continued on, and at the end of it, my boss proposed the idea to me of working in the library and taking his place. And I sat in my chair stunned that she would offer a 28-year-old that kind of position. But I applied in August. I thought, what do I have to lose? This is a great opportunity. I might not ever see such an opportunity again. And 6 months go by with the application process, and in January I was hired. And of course, part of that process meant I would have to relocate to Washington, D.C. And I'm thankful to say that I actually earned the Mary Owenslinger Scholarship from Learning Ally in 2020. And I ended up not having to use it for college because Voc Rehab stepped up and said, we'll pay for your college tuition this coming year. And so that scholarship, combined with others that I had earned and not had to use, funded my trip to move to DC. So it's been a blessing all around. And I started working officially on February 28th for NLS. And I haven't given up the idea of piano teaching, but the nice thing about this job is it's a 9 to 5, 40-hour week job. And so I can still teach on the side if I want, but whether it's feast or famine, I still have this job to carry me through. And that also means I can keep my lesson prices nice and low and affordable for everyone.
So, well, congratulations, Timothy, on the job. And I think your story just highlights just the fact that sometimes life throws us things that kind of changes our plans. And it's kind of incumbent on us as individuals, be in our social lives or even our careers, to be flexible and to be open to different paths. So the next question is for both Kennedy and Timothy. So what types of support were most helpful to you as you started working on your next steps? This could be support from friends, support from articles you read, or just what really helped you along the way in making these decisions?
So I would say for me, there were a couple of things. First, I guess a little bit of a shameless plug, but actually the College Success Program, as a matter of fact, the thing that motivated me to pursue, to try and apply for a mentor through the College Success Program was that I had never met a blind person that had been to graduate school and gone through that process. And I was very aware that as awesome as my college was, and the sighted students and professors on my campus, as awesome as those people were, there were certain questions that they couldn't really help me with. They couldn't really offer perspective on things like accommodations for the standardized testing and how and when I should disclose in my application. So I did work with a mentor. I still work with her. She's fantastic. And then again, as I kind of said before, some really great professors. In my undergrad, I had some really amazing faculty that connected me with alumni in my field, in the field of neuroscience, to kind of talk about the pros and cons of going to graduate school. And these professors also provided some encouragement when I initially got rejected. They were the ones that were kind of like, hey, this doesn't make you a bad student or a bad scientist, go for master's degrees. So I'm really grateful for them. And also for the professor, as I mentioned earlier, when I was getting my master's degree, who encouraged me to pursue my current field. She provided a lot of support. She provided suggestions for my application as well. So I'm really grateful to her as well.
So in my case, I would say the support came from multiple avenues. First and foremost, my family, because they encouraged me to fulfill my dreams, and they made every effort they could to make that possible. Since I was studying music, one of the things they made sure of is that I always had good quality instruments to practice on and great teachers to teach me. They had a hard time when I was a child finding teachers who were willing to work with a blind student. It took them many, many years to find someone who was a piano teacher that was willing to take on a blind student. And this was the mid to late 90s when they were searching. So we didn't have all the technology resources that we have today. Even in public libraries, there wasn't a whole lot on how to teach blind students back then. And so my grade school piano teacher ended up designing her own curriculum, and she taught me how to play music by ear. But I was blessed to know another blind lady through connections from my mom that went to college as a blind person in the 70s before there was any such thing as ADA rules and disability offices and all that. And she got herself a music education degree and went and taught at a school for the blind in Togo, West Africa. And she taught me how to read Braille music. We went through the entire Richard Tesh Introduction to Braille Music for the Blind Student course. And upon graduating high school, I knew I wanted to study music in college, and picking an instrument was a little challenging, but I chose organ since I had studied it for half as long as piano in grade school, and I wanted to bring my skills to an equal level. But I still wasn't sure in college where I would want to invest those skills. But I had good professors. They weren't able to give me a whole lot of guidance because I didn't, shall we say, fit the mold that they had in mind for me. But I did learn a lot of skills from them. And so even though I didn't pursue the paths that they necessarily thought I should do, I still gleaned quite a lot of knowledge from them. And finally, I would say it was just friends from all sides, Learning Ally being one of them. And coincidentally, my last mentor, Rashad Jones, was someone that I had known since before entering college. I found out that he was a student at Columbus State, and we unintentionally bumped into each other as strangers in the year 2011 when I was auditioning for a piano competition there. And I discovered how well they had accommodated his needs. They provided a room in the library with all the necessary equipment he would need to get his homework done. And it was quite amazing.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for those answers. I know no matter what stage you are in life, be it entering college, entering high school, entering the work world, retiring. I haven't done that yet, but your life will be made so much easier if you have a support system or have different resources available to assist you along your journey. So I'm glad that you guys have been able to leverage the people around you and the resources at your fingertips. Kennedy, you've discussed this a little bit, but would you be able to expand on the application process to grad school that you went through?
Yes. So again, it's a bit of a long answer. I'm going to do my best to be concise because there's different components to each step that I won't talk about as much, but I'll kind of go through and talk about the steps for applying for graduate school. So the very, very first thing you want to do is select a program. And actually you want to select a couple of programs because if you don't get into your top program and you haven't applied to anything else, then you have to wait a whole year. So that's the most important thing. And I will just mention very briefly kind of about that aspect. You want to reach out, think about what you're interested in, whether that's research or study, whatever it is, and kind of look into who's doing the work that you're interested in and reach out to those faculty members. It's great to establish a connection with them. And often they will let you know if they can take on students either in their lab or just for you to be advised by them. And that's important information to have because if they're not taking on students, that might not be a program for you, or you might want to look into different options within that program. So that's sort of the way you go about selecting a program. And there's other factors you want to keep in mind, location and things like that. But those are the main things. So once you've selected a couple of programs, you know where you're going to be applying. You want to go to their online applications online. They're usually really easy to find. And make sure you can compile all the materials that they need. Generally speaking, the materials required include an online application, just something you fill out, a curriculum vitae or a CV, which is sort of like a longer version of a resume, copies of your unofficial transcripts, a personal statement, and letters of recommendation. Schools may also require some form of standardized testing, such as the GRE, although I will kind of note that a lot of schools are sort of going away from requiring standardized testing. And then some schools will require an additional written statement from you. So you have your personal statement, but some programs may also require a diversity statement where you kind of talk about what makes you unique, or a statement of research intent where you talk about your research interests. So making sure you know exactly what it is you're going to be writing. Once you have compiled all of those materials, you've uploaded everything you needed to upload, you've submitted your application, one of three things will happen. Either A, you will wait about a month. Does tend to vary a little bit, but usually it's about a month. You wait and you find out you got rejected outright. That does happen. It's unfortunate, but it does. B, you wait about the same amount of time and you get accepted. And if it's your dream program and it's the one you want, you can accept the offer and go forward from there. Or C, you will be asked for an interview, especially at more competitive schools. They want to get to know you a little bit better. And the interview process has changed a little bit since COVID. Before COVID, they might fly you out to campus. Nowadays, it's often done over Zoom, but you usually have a few rounds of interviews that take place over a few days or even a week. One of them is with any faculty members you've expressed interest in. You would have done that in your personal statement, expressed interest in specific faculty members. They'll talk to you about your work and kind of determine if you might be a good fit. Another interview you might have is with faculty members who are interested in you. Even if you didn't express interest in them, they might still want to work with you. And then typically a third interview, sometimes it's with a current student, sometimes it's with a panel of people from the admissions committee or the people who decide who goes to graduate school. So after those 3 or so rounds of interviews, you again wait. Time varies a little bit. I've waited up to 2 months, but typically it's not that long. It's usually a few weeks. and then you find out if you get accepted or rejected, and you kind of move forward based on that. And if you get accepted, again, you can decide to accept that offer and go forward from there. So that was a very, very brief overview, because there's a lot to each of these components, but that's sort of an overview of what is required for the graduate school application process.
Awesome. Thank you, Kennedy. So Timothy, similar question to Kennedy. Can you share your application process when you applied for your job? So I know that you, it's more or less traditionally, you transitioned from an internship to the full-time job. So you can maybe talk about just that interview process, transitioning from an intern to a full-time employee.
Okay, so it's a little more than that. Unfortunately, when I actually applied for the internship, they told me right on the internship application, this will not turn into a job. And so when my boss told me about the job, I often tell people, and I'm going to use a fictional illustration here, but I often tell people, basically in a professional way, my boss was telling me, this is your dream job. If I was you, I'd take it. Just like the conductor in Polar Express said, seems to me tonight's your crucial night. If I were you, I'd think about climbing on board. So I talked to my folks about it when she mentioned it, and I was willing to take it, but the move to Washington, D.C. was the part that was a little frightening, not just for being in a new place and taking a big leap of faith, and a very expensive leap of faith, mind you, to land this job, but also the fact that my father had lost his job in the fall of the previous year, and he got a new job in January, but they only gave him 1 week of PTO his first year, and he had already used that up just for sick leave and doctor appointments, because they don't give him that separately. And so I was afraid that if I applied for the job, that they would want me to come and work before the year was out, and I would have to tell them that I can't start until January because my father has no days off to move me up here, and there was no other way for me to get to DC without him. So I took my step of faith, and all I could do, my boss was not allowed to share any more information with me. She just said, if you're interested, go to USA Jobs and apply. And she couldn't even tell me when it would be posted. So I had to just check USA Jobs every day, typing in keywords like librarian, Braille music, just music alone, Braille alone. And because I knew it would be in one of those categories. And after a while, I kind of thought, they're never going to post this, because I would check every day and I wouldn't see it. And the one day I felt like, I think I'll check tomorrow. I've checked every day and it's not here. My mom urged me, go check it. I know you're driven crazy checking the job list only to find it's not there, but do it this one time for me. And so I did, and sure enough, there it was. And I ran back to the kitchen and told her, Mom, you were right. There it is. And so that very night after supper, she and I went through the application process together, because there was a lot of paperwork to do. When you apply for a government job, it's a whole lot more intense than applying for a private sector job, and you still got all the competition that you get in the private sector too. And fortunately for this type of job, because the field is so unique, I expected not to have too much competition, and if I had any at all, it would be Braille transcribers wanting a more stable means of income, because just like musicians, theirs is feast or famine. They can have a whole bunch of transcriptions and then nothing for a long time. So, long story short, I applied, and it took well over a month before they closed the application window. And after that, another month goes by and I'm interviewed. And then another month goes by and they're contacting references that I submitted. And around Christmas, I had to pass a few other interview steps. They needed to know, because of COVID, they needed to know my vaccine status. And I thought that would be a roadblock, because I had to exempt the vaccine due to a severe medical reaction I had to the MMR in 2015. and I was advised at that time by my doctor not to take any more vaccines of any kind. And so I was wondering, will they accept this? And they did. I heard back in mid-January, and then within about a week after that, I got my final offer, and then it was Operation Scramble because I had the longest deadline they gave me was 1 month to pack up, move to DC, and learn the lay of the land and start working the job. So we found a place, and I moved up Valentine's weekend and was able to start doing some travel training with a mobility instructor. I was in the Georgia Voc Rehab, and my counselor, because of me not having a counselor through all of COVID, was very nice to me and not only got some services going for me during the fall of 21, but she also transferred my case to some people she knew in DC so that I could get services right away as soon as I got here. And so I found an apartment close enough to walk to work, and the rest is pretty much history.
Awesome. Great stories, guys. So, Kennedy, you are obviously efforting for your PhD, and Timothy, you are working right now. So we'll get both perspectives here. So for everyone, what kinds of questions did you ask yourself when considering entering the workforce as opposed to going back to school? We'll start with Kennedy.
Yeah, so there were a couple of questions I asked myself, I suppose. One was, what is my goal and how am I going to go about pursuing that? And I will be honest, like probably everyone, I would assume, there were times in my life where I really didn't have an answer to that question. I didn't really know career-wise what was happening next. And so when I couldn't answer that question, I would ask myself the question, what do I like? What am I passionate about? Particularly in my field, because I, for a long time didn't imagine myself moving to a different field. So what am I passionate about? And how can I go about pursuing that passion, and what can it lead to career-wise? So those are sort of a couple of the questions that I asked myself when I was sort of thinking forward and trying to figure out what was next.
So for mine, I had goals, but they were very broad, and I had to refine them, sort of like you refine a search on Google. I knew I wanted to be a church musician at first, and I am fulfilling that goal today. It's unpaid. After that, I thought I wanted to be a piano teacher, and I am still attempting to do that in my spare time today. And for a while, I pondered the idea in high school of being a piano tuner. And when I was applying for graduate school at Georgia State, one of the teachers actually asked me if I was to be accepted, how I thought about learning to tune pianos. And I told him at first that I didn't think I could do that because a tuner had discouraged me, saying that you could only do tuning if you could use a tuner machine. And he popped the question back to me of what did they make tuning forks for? And I sat there stunned in the chair, and he assured me that you can be a piano tuner if you're willing to learn, and you don't need a machine. And so he taught me the basics of how to tune pianos. And so that's an idea that I plan to eventually start a side hustle of. And then, of course, it's funny. In college, I had a phobia of wanting to learn to read Braille music because I saw a few quote unquote real scores, stuff beyond what Tesh teaches you in his course. And my inward emotions just screamed at how complex it was. And I thought, there's no way I'll ever get to know Braille music this well. And my college professor wisely told me my sophomore year, he said, you need to learn your music with Braille. And so he gave me my pieces. He said, these are the pieces I want you to learn. Find as many as you can in Braille scores from NLS. Whatever you can't find, let me know, and we'll arrange to have somebody record for you by ear. But if it's in Braille, you need to learn it with Braille. And as I got into it, I had to have a dictionary by my side because there were a lot of new signs I didn't know. But after a while, the waters didn't seem so boisterous anymore, if you will. It felt more like I was in a calm wading pool rather than an ocean with boisterous waves pushing you about. And the ocean of Braille music didn't seem so bad. And if someone had told me at that time that eventually I would be working in a place where I would be checking transcribers' work of new Braille music scores and things, I would have thought, who, me? Never. But you never know how one block fits to another, one puzzle piece fits to another puzzle piece, and before you know it, the puzzle comes together, and here we are. So it's what I would say is I like to listen to Dave Ramsey a lot, and he has this saying, you work like it all depends on you, and you pray like it all depends on God. Well, for college students, I would say you study like it all depends on you, and you pray like it all depends on God.
Awesome. So for the panel, for Kennedy and Timothy, could you please quickly just give us one piece of advice, your best advice for a student, for them to consider as they are considering their next steps, or your one piece of advice that you give a student when considering their next steps?
Yeah, so I would say first, if you're thinking of graduate school, make sure it makes sense for you to do that, because if it doesn't, that will come through in your application. But the more important thing I would say, and I would say, remember this if you remember nothing else that I personally have said tonight. This might sound a little cheesy, but believe in yourself. Believe in yourself as you're applying for that job or for that program. And when you ultimately land your dream job or land in your dream graduate program, definitely believe in yourself, because you've earned the right to be there.
I'm going to kind of piggyback on what Kennedy said, and add to the fact that you need to keep an open mind. Again, to bring up kind of a fictitious but well-stated point. Back in the 90s, there was a show called Magic School Bus that was often seen on public television. And the teacher, Miss Frizzle, said on one of the episodes, keep an open mind and you never know who will walk in. Well, that does apply in our adult life. We should work hard and study, but then also be flexible and see where things go. Because in reality, blind or sighted, we all walk by faith and not by sight. And sometimes our dream paths can end up being bigger than we expect. And you never know what will happen. So do that. And also, to go back to something that Kennedy was saying earlier, we should always do a lot of research before we commit to something. Because especially when it comes to college, if you know you want to go to grad school, do some research and find out what the pros and cons would be of having the degree, and also what's pros and cons of what schools offer what for that degree, because that can greatly pay off in the end. And especially for me, I went to school later in life. I started my undergrad at 22. So when I finished, I was 26 years old, and I thought, I do not want to change career paths. Whatever I pick, I want to commit to and stay with and get a job when I graduate as soon as I can.
Awesome. So we have one more question for the panel. Then I think I'm going to turn back over to Katie for final announcements and some Q&A. So if you could briefly, the two of you, just talk about the top skill that you think has been integral to your success up to this point. So Kennedy as a PhD student and Timothy as a working individual.
I would say problem solving, specifically kind of knowing how to find the solution that you need, whether that's dealing with some sort of inaccessible website, figuring out who you need to contact about that, or trying to figure out, what research you want to pursue next, what program you want to pursue next, knowing how to kind of reason and solve problems that come up, and then knowing how and when to ask for an expert opinion.
I would say for mine, it would be having a versatile portfolio of skills. There are multiple skills that got me into this job set. Being having a thorough knowledge of the Braille codes is one, especially Braille music, but also literary Braille and even a little bit of foreign language Braille, because we encounter all of those in LS. Being a skilled musician in piano and organ is also another attribute that allowed me to get this job. Another skill is being able to know assistive technology well, not just the computer, but the iPhone and other things. Right now at my job, we're beta testing a new digital talking book player that will hopefully be released in a year or two. And you got to have a good knowledge of technology to be able to point out problems that could arise for someone else who's not so good with technology. So just all those skills together join up to form the perfect dream job.
Thank you so much for your candid answers, everyone. So I'm going to turn it next back over to Katie Itaggio for the rest of the meeting.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Preston. Thank you, Kennedy. And thank you, Timothy. Great information. Thanks for sharing your stories. Right now, we're going to go ahead and take your questions. If you have a question, you can use the raise hand feature, or you can also put it in the chat. It looks like we do have one question so far. It looks like it's for Timothy, but I'm sure anybody can answer. It's from Teresa. She said she's wondering, Timothy, wondering, did you have to learn how to cook when you moved, or did you already know how to cook?
Good question, Teresa. When I was beginning my college studies, I ended up having to take a gap year because the school that Mercer University, where I applied for my undergrad, by the time I got accepted, they had run out of music scholarships. And also I graduated high school using Windows XP and a PackMate. And so I was extremely behind the times. And so I had several tutors from Georgia Vocational Rehab come over and bring me up to date on my technology. They took me on mobility lessons, both in my parents' neighborhood and also later on at Mercer. They actually drove me to the school and we did lessons across campus to learn how to get to places like the cafeteria and the dorms. And by the time I started school, I was showing sighted people where to go, which was kind of funny. But and the cooking skills, we started learning to cook, and then my mobility instructor discovered that the school did not permit most students to cook in their dorms. And so that kind of slammed the brakes on the cooking lessons. And though I was commuting to graduate school, I kind of left cooking to my parents. So I'll be honest, as a bachelor living on my own right now, I mostly live on microwavable dinners, and at the very most cooking I do is pizza in the oven. So it's mostly microwave meals for me at the moment. I am going to get connected to, I believe it's the Community Lighthouse for the Blind here in DC eventually, and have them teach me some basic cooking skills. But for right now, the main focus is just getting used to the new to the new schedule, the new life of working versus going to school. Even though you don't have to do homework when you come home, my teacher was right in college when he said you're much busier when you go to work versus going to college. So, because you have to take care of yourself, whereas in college your parents do that for you.
Thanks, Timothy. I'm just to add to that a little bit, on the College Success Program on our website, if you go to our resources section, there's various categories within there. One of those is living on your own. If you go to that category, we do have some resources, some articles on cooking. Obviously, you might want some more extensive training on that, but there are some articles in there that have some helpful information. And also this past summer, we did do a cooking workshop where CSP members that joined were able to attend weekly the workshop where our CSP mentors were giving tips and going over recipes and talking about just different things, important things to know about cooking. That will probably be back next summer. So it's a little bit of a ways till that, but there are some of those resources we have available. We have another question from Ellie. Ellie Price, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, go for it.
Okay, I have a question for Kennedy. You mentioned in your spiel about your application process to grad school that you connected with faculty in the programs that you were interested in. And I'm just curious to know how you found them.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'll do my best to answer as concisely as I can. Thank you for that, Ellie. So basically what I did was I knew kind of what I was interested in my field. So I looked up scientific journal articles about that, found out who the authors were, and literally Googled that faculty member's name and then lab website. So for example, if the faculty member's name was Bob Smith, I would Google Bob Smith lab website. And that gives you information about their lab and what they do in their lab. And if it's not a faculty with a lab, you can just Google like that person, and then the university will also give you information about them. So for example, I might Google like Bob Smith, Harvard University, for example. That will give you information about the faculty, and it will give you usually an email address. Typically, faculty members and professors are pretty easy to find. They have their work kind of out there. A lot of times it's been published, and they are often looking for students to reach out. So it's in their best interest to be easy to find too. So you just Google their name and then either the university or just Google lab website next to their name if it's faculty member doing research in a lab. And you can get lots of information about them and their email, and then you just reach out and say, hello, my name is Kennedy. Here's a little bit of information about me. And then ask if they would be willing to meet with you and discuss the possibility of you working with them in the future. I hope that
okay. No, that's that's very helpful. I am just a quick follow-up question because I'm interested in graduate school. At what point during your degree would you actually work with the faculty? Is that at the beginning, or is that more towards the end when you're actually doing your, how do I say it, like the more practical side of it, so much as instead of the schoolwork?
So I will say that is going to vary a lot by program.
Okay.
So some programs require you to do research rotations and you'll work with different faculty. Some will require you to be placed with a faculty member right away. But in either case, it is, I think, in your best interest to reach out to a faculty member, definitely before you start applying, but get those connections sooner rather than later, because then they might see your application and be like, oh, I remember Ellie, and can be kind of somebody in your corner if you've met with them even over email, but especially if you've managed to arrange like a Zoom meeting with them. It can work very much in your favor when you actually apply. So reach out to them early either way, but in terms of when you would work with a faculty member, that will vary.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, best of luck.
Thanks.
Okay, looks like we have another question from Ashley. Ashley, if you want to go ahead and unmute and ask her question.
You said Ashley, right?
Yes, Ashley.
Yeah, I'm Ashley. Okay, great. Yeah, that's me. So yeah, I had a few questions. I think for Timothy, yeah. Anyway, you say you work for Library of Congress. That's nice. And it sounds like you just started, which is interesting because it's here in DC and I live in Northern Virginia. So, anyway, my questions, yeah. I have considered actually working for the Library of Congress because I graduated from college, Marymount University, and I like communications, and public relations. So, and the library stuff in general. So I guess okay. So my question was, did you find the application to go to work actually pretty accessible online through USA Jobs? Because I've heard mixed things about compliance with what they call Section 508. So, and if so, what hurdles were they? And also, when you got to the Library of Congress, um, I guess I'm wondering how quickly the accommodations process went, given that it is the government. Although I do know that they're pretty generous with providing reasonable accommodations to blind people. So yeah, those are my two questions. Yeah, it's hard to say that because I know that they're. I think I got it. Yeah, because I know that they're kind of complex, but yeah, if you could tell me a little bit about that, because I'm definitely interested in Library of Congress or a contract position with them. So it definitely strikes a chord, and I want to congratulate you also on going to relocating and being uh, and being Oh, and good luck to Kathleen. I know what you mean by applying to jobs and right and left and not hearing anything because I had that same problem. It's very competitive. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Starting with the application process, I will say the job application was a lot better than the internship application. Someone had dropped the ball big time, and it wasn't my boss. Unfortunately, when at least in NLS, the people who actually do the hiring are totally separate from the people who actually um, are your supervisor and coworkers. They have no say at all in terms of once they request that they want you. That's about all they can do. Um, they don't have any more authority than that. So it's almost kind of like when you're applying to a college and you want to be a music major, but you got to get through the admissions gate first before you can even audition into the music school. And that's why when I went to Mercer that I had trouble. That's why I got in so late, because I had my SAT scores didn't come through at a high enough standard to get accepted. It was my ACT that actually got me into school. Well, with this case, someone had dropped the ball, and even though I had applied for the internship and was interviewed, um, they had a whole bunch of onboarding documents that I had to fill out. The actual application was very easy since that was an internship, but the onboarding documents, they sent those all to me the Friday before I was supposed to start and said, we need them all by Monday. And it was enough paperwork that it would take you close to 2 weeks to do it. My mother and I literally spent probably about 24 hours filling out paperwork. And even that wasn't enough to get everything done by Monday, but we got the majority of it submitted. And some of that required us to print it, fill it out by hand, and scan it back. Now, fortunately for the actual job application, since that was through USA Jobs, it was an online forum. We were able to save our place and come back to it each day. And when it was time for final submission, I was able to download a copy to save on my computer for personal reference. And there were actually a few times where I found some typos. My mother and I kind of worked on the questions together because she's really good at finding the power of words to sum things up clearly. She majored in English in college. And so I would give her what I wanted to say, and then she would put it really nicely. And then I would fine tune edit it. And I found some places where we had some typos in it, and I was able to fix those on my L Braille all by myself. So the actual job application was much better. Some of the forms they sent required a digital signature, and for those I had to get sighted help. But again, living with your parents, that's one of the nice benefits is you can call on them to help you in those situations. Um, the job itself, when I got there, I was mind blown by how well they accommodated. They had my computer ready for me on day one. I was expecting to have to teach them how to install JAWS and um, get things braille labeled appropriately, and they were on the ball. I mean, within the second or third day, I was able to start working on job related projects because things were already set up and ready to go. I had to authorize Goodfeel, which is the Braille music software that we use equivalent to Finale and Sibelius. But that was really the only software I had to license myself. Otherwise, everything else was ready to go when I got there. So it was very well taken care of.
Great, thank you, Timothy. We have a couple more questions that came in through the chat. I know we're getting close to our time here, but we'll just get through two more of these questions and then we'll wrap things up. The next question is from Kathleen. Kathleen said, I recently graduated with my bachelor's degree, congratulations, and have been applying for jobs left and right for the last 3 months or so. Is there a specific way or process to know or identify if I need graduate school?
I would say yes. Often job descriptions will say like minimum bachelor's degree, minimum what they need. But if you are concerned that you're not getting jobs due to lack of training, I would try, if you can, to reach out to people in your network. So if you happen to know alumni from your program that graduated before you did, reach out to them. If you don't, maybe reach out to some faculty and see if they can connect you with alumni to kind of find out like, hey, this is what I want to do. Those people probably have some idea of if they needed graduate school or not. Because the job search process is very discouraging and it can be tough to know if what you need is more training. So definitely reach out and make absolutely 100% sure that that is the case before you start to think about pursuing graduate school.
Thanks, Kennedy. And for our last question, it's Teresa again. This question she directed towards Kennedy. Teresa was wondering, Kennedy, when you went to grad school, did you live in the dorm and did you have to cook while living in the dorm?
So this is, again, I know we're getting close on time, so I'm going to do my best to be quick, but this is an interesting one because, you know, student housing is really easy to get in undergrad, very difficult in graduate school. Dorms tend to be very, very expensive, and it's often not worth the expense to try and live in a dorm during graduate school. So for my master's degree, I did live in a sort of student housing, but it was an apartment building. And now I live in kind of a special type of housing where I have to pay a lower rent, which is really nice. And in terms of having to cook, yes, absolutely, I needed to cook. You know, in undergrad, you're often on a meal plan, as I think Timothy spoke about as well. You're often on a meal plan, and so meals are provided. Not so in graduate school, especially if you are living off of student housing, which again, I recommend. If that is a concern for you, kind of that learning how to cook, also emphasize the resources Katie mentioned. I started with a crock pot, which was a really great way to get my foot in the door because I didn't totally know how to cook that much when I first started graduate school. So I started with a crock pot. If that's a possibility for you, you just put stuff in there and you let it go for a few hours, and then you have a great meal. So that's a good place to start. Also simple like one pot meals or even sheet pan dinners that take like 30 minutes in the oven or on the stove. There are ways to learn it if it is a concern for you, but yes, I wouldn't say, I mean, you could rely on not cooking, but really you almost have to cook if when you're in graduate school.
Great, thank you, Kennedy. With that, I think we're going to wrap things up. If you have any more questions, if you think of anything even afterwards, I'm going to put in the chat our email address. It's csp@envisionus.com. So you can email us with your questions at any time. And I highly recommend also visiting our website, which is also in the chat. It's www.collegesuccessbvi.org. I can say it and type it at the same time. And I recommend going there and looking up our resources. There's lots of stuff on this topic. And yeah, so hopefully everybody got some great information out of this. Again, thank you to Kennedy and Timothy and Preston for joining us. And hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you.
Awesome. Great job, Kennedy and Timothy.
Katie, before you end the call, can I ask you something off recording?
Yes. Let me go off recording here. Thank you, everyone.